But at the top of that list, John, sadly, Deflategate returned to the headlines today. How the hell is this thing not resolved?
Well, I think we're going to get to the Supreme Court before it gets resolved,
gosh.
believe it or not. That's the way it's going. And, 4 days after, it was kind of foreshadowed, 4 days after Brady lost the appeal in the circuit, he hired Ted Olson, who was a former Solicitor General and has been before the Supreme Court about 70 times. So that was the strategy, and they got one of the best people in the world to make the argument. So we'll see. The Second Circuit's reputation is they're not gonna overturn the ruling before. So from that point, if that's the way it goes, then the next step is the U.S. Supreme Court.
Unreal.
And it's pretty clear the NFLPA is going to go that route.
So what does Brady and his side, they want the appeal to be reheard by the Second Circuit in New York, correct?
Correct. And that's basically the first time it's a 3-judge panel amongst the judges on the court. In the second one, if they agree to hear it, it would be before all the judges, which I believe is 13 or 14. I'm not sure how many. But if they agree to hear it, it will be before all of the judges, not just the 3-person panel.
So DeMaurice Smith this morning basically was like, look, nothing's going to get done in this room. We keep having meetings. Nothing's going to happen here. That's an indication that neither side wants to make a decision, right? I mean, the NFL doesn't want to make a ruling. He was asked, well, why do you guys give all the power to Goodell? He didn't really give any comment on that. This is both sides saying we want the courts to tell us what to do.
Well, what it really is, and let's be blatantly honest about what this is, the NFLPA trying to reopen the collective bargaining agreement in the courts. That's what it is. Because as it reads right now, it doesn't matter, Mike, whether Roger Goodell's right or wrong in this particular issue. Under the CBA, he had the power to do what he did.
Right.
It's as simple as that. And the players gave him that power, and they're not happy with it. They obviously can't reopen it until the next CBA, which is 5 years away. So to sort of get around that, they want the Supreme Court to say, you know what, this isn't right, this isn't fair, the way he's been handling this, and they want sort of an activist court to take things into their own hands and change the CBA. That at the core, it has nothing to do with Deflategate. That's what's going on. That's what the NFLPA is trying to do.
Right, so they want to try to change the way that punishments get handed down.
Correct. And they can't do it. Still sick.
You and everybody else.
Exactly.
Oh, boy, it's been awful.
They cannot do it until the CBA is reopened, but that, again, is 5 years down the line. So they're trying to sort of get around that aspect of it by putting it in the Supreme Court's hands and seeing what they say. The odds are against them, but you never know.
The fact that deflated footballs could make it to the highest court in the world is bizarre to me, and that this is still going on, that they cannot come up with some sort of resolution. Like, okay, you're appealing a 4-game suspension. You know what? This is so ridiculous. You're right. We'll give you 2. I mean, would it be that simple, or is that thinking too basic here?
Well, I think it might be that simple as far as Tom goes. I think he might be willing to accept that. I think from the player's perspective, the NFLPA, as I said, it's a far bigger issue. It goes far beyond that. And they want it to go to the Supreme Court and sort of roll the dice and see what happens. But clearly the NFL doesn't want to compromise either. So we really don't have to worry about that being the end game.
If you read the tea leaves in this one, John, will Tom Brady be on the field as he was last year on opening night? Or I guess they don't play opening night this year on that first Sunday.
Well, if the court agrees to hear the appeal, he will be, just from the timing of it, and they'll likely hold up the suspension until things are final. So if they agree to hear the appeal, he will likely be on the field week 1. But that remains to be seen. They might say, we don't want to hear it. We don't agree. It's done. And we'll leave it at that. And then they have to go to the Supreme Court. And the timing on that would likely, and you're right. You're right to laugh. It's absurd that we're talking about deflated footballs in the highest court in this country.
Not to mention, another season has already passed. I mean, this is like, all right, you already let him play last year. You already made a mockery of this situation. That is what is so unbelievable to me, is that, look, the statute of limitations is over on this. He got one over on you, or you got, or vice versa. No one's winning this one. Just forget about it.
Well,
why is the NFL still pursuing this is what I want to know.
Because they don't want the precedent. And they don't want it being overturned. They fight everything to the hilt. And they usually win in the end. And I always point back to the StarCap case, which was pretty high profile. In that particular case, Pat Williams, who was a nose tackle for the Vikings, a darn good one, he actually retired before that court case ended, and never had to serve his suspension because he was out of the game. That's how long that one took. I think Tom still wants to play a long time, so that's not as likely here, but that's the time frame some of these things take.
You wonder what this is costing taxpayers.
Well, it's sorry, Mike. It's not costing taxpayers anything at this point, because the NFL has to foot their bill, and the NFLPA has to foot their bill. So from that part of it, it's not costing the people any money. So at least that's one thing you can put a check mark in a column.
And this was today was the deadline where the Brady side had to do something, right?
Yes, today was the deadline, but we all knew it was coming because Olson was hired as the lawyer. So just his history and his history with the Supreme Court, he was on, Bush versus Gore. He was in Iran-Contra.
But you go from Bush versus Gore to deflated footballs. I don't know if that's a good career turn or not.
Well, yeah, as long as you get the check, it's a good career turn.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com with the latest on that. I can't believe that story. It's unbelievable to me. The Deflategate story still happening. All right, let's open OTAs tomorrow, the second round of them, John. And I guess, some of the things in this second round here, Jim Schwartz is going to talk tomorrow, so we'll probably be focusing a little bit more on the defense. What questions do you think need to be answered by Jim Schwartz and his defense entering the second round of these OTAs?
Well, we want to hear about the depth, and obviously Jim had mentioned he wanted numbers at the linebacking position, so I can't imagine he feels comfortable with that right now. Obviously Fletcher Cox is going to be addressed, and the depth at defensive tackle, and also how he feels about the cornerback position. So I think when you look at the starting 11, it's not bad, but once one injury, something happens, a butterfly effect anywhere, there's just not a lot of depth on this defense, and we're going to kind of see what kind of confidence Jim Schwartz has in them.
Yeah, and, one thing about this defense, too, that we talked about a little bit on Friday is the depth at the defensive tackle or lack thereof at that position, and also at some of the linebacker spots where you wonder, after last year we saw all the linebacking problems they had where we thought they had a plethora of guys at that position and they ended up in big trouble by the end of the year. How are they going to be able to answer those questions?
Yeah, and it's a good question because if you look at it, Jordan Hicks is the starting middle linebacker, and as well as he played last season, obviously he tore his pec. He wasn't at OTAs last Tuesday because of leg tightness. He has a history of injuries dating back to his days at Texas. And then when you look at what's behind him, whether it's Najee Good or Joe Walker, obviously you're not going to feel very, very comfortable with it. And then talk about Michael Kendricks. He didn't have a great year last year. And what's behind him? Really, Najee Good and maybe Mike Tavares, who's an undrafted rookie free agent. And then you have Nigel Bradham coming off a bad year in Buffalo. That's a position where, let's face it, Jim Schwartz is probably losing sleep as we speak each and every night.
Right now, I don't know that I can answer this question. You were at OTAs last week. Number one, I saw a tweet over the weekend about Nolan Carroll that he's still not cleared. Is that true?
No, he's not cleared for team drills, but he was doing some individual work, so he's not 100%. But they expect him to be online for training camp, so that's not that big of an issue at this point.
All right, so with Carroll, Rowe, Leotis McKelvin, Ron Brooks, I guess Mills is somewhat in that mix, Ja'Cory Shepherd, who was the darling of last year until he got hurt. Who are your starting corners?
Well, my starters are Eric Rowe and Leotis McKelvin, and I kind of told you about McKelvin last week. Granted, it's early, but you can see the talent he has as a former first-round pick. Now, granted, he's 30 years old now. He's had some injuries in the past, but you can see just how talented he is if he can be on the field. So I think if he's healthy, he's a starter. And I think the Eagles like the upside of Rose so much. That gets him on the field before Nolan Carroll. But that remains to be seen, because if Nolan plays well, he has an opportunity to prove something.
Last year we saw a lot of Malcolm Jenkins in the slot spot. Do you think that is something Jim Schwartz will do? And is that something we hope to learn in these OTAs?
No, in fact, Malcolm's already said it's going to be similar to last year. He's probably not going to play any nickelback throughout the OTAs, the mini camp, even training camp, until late in the process. They want to look at all these bodies they have and throw them at the position, because the preferable way to go is to keep Malcolm at safety and bring in a traditional nickelback. But if no one can handle it, all of a sudden you have to use him in that position as they did last year. But the key is Schwartz knows he can do it, so he doesn't have to take a lot of reps there.
Who are the candidates to take that spot? Last year, Shepherd was the guy until he got hurt. Is he number one on that list?
No, Ron Brooks was number one. He was lining up with the number ones in OTAs. But remember, Nolan Carroll wasn't there in team drill. So sort of the loser between Nolan Carroll and Leotis McKelvin, I would assume that would be Carroll, would slide into the nickel position as the top option. But they want to look at those guys, and Ron Brooks is one of them. Jalen Mills, as you mentioned. Even Ja'Cory Shepherd and Blake Countess, another rookie, I would imagine are going to be rotated in. And it's sort of a cast of 1,000s. You throw a lot of bodies at the position and try to solve it if you can. And if you can't, you got a great default setting, and that's Malcolm Jenkins.
Yeah. John McMullen's with us. Eagles OTAs open tomorrow. I know we haven't made, or people aren't making a lot of Fletcher Cox, but he is learning a new position, right? I mean, that is something that should be considered. I know he played in the 4-3 and kind of the Y9 in his first year here, but he has been out of that for the last couple of seasons. Is he going to be behind, or is he not missing all that much by shifting defenses here?
I don't think he's going to miss much. In fact, this defense, if anything, is going to be easier for him because it's a one-gap defense instead of a two-gap defense. So he has less on his plate as far as responsibilities go. And if you think about Bill Davis, the former defensive coordinator, he said, Fletcher's so good, he can play 5 technique, 3 technique, 0 technique, 1 technique. Anything you want him to play, he can play. He's that good. And I think Jim Schwartz knows that. They prefer him to be here, certainly. It wouldn't hurt. But they kind of know as long as they have him for training camp, they're going to be fine with Fletcher Cox.
Well, we hope so. And, you talk about the lack of depth there. It's basically Cox and Logan, and then Bo Allen, and I couldn't even tell you another tackle on the team.
Well, Taylor Hart was lining up for Fletcher Cox at 3 technique last week, so that tells you. just how bad the drop-off is. And then they signed a veteran in Mike Martin. You mentioned Bo Allen. They have 3 rookie free agents in at defensive tackle, but it's not a ton of talent behind those 2 starters who are very, very good. But again, the margin of error is tremendously small when you talk about injuries, because it's going to be a significant drop-off if either of those guys, Fletcher or Benny Logan, are not on the field.
Yeah, we talked a little linebacker. You mentioned Hicks, and they brought in Nigel Bradham, Michael Kendricks. If the depth behind those guys not great either. So it sounds like a good starting group for the most part on the tackles and at the linebacker spot, but the depth behind those guys a big problem, and we'll see at OTAs who really emerges here as they start tomorrow. And then you go on the offensive side of the ball, John, and we talk a little bit about running back Ryan Matthews, the durability, those questions. We know Sproles isn't in. There's the rookie Wendell Smallwood, but I don't think we've talked a lot about Kenyon Barner, who's still here. Does he factor in at all in your mind?
Well, I think he has to factor in, if only because you don't know what Wendell Smallwood is at this point. I mean, you really don't. The hope is there. We've seen he's a volume guy in college at West Virginia, but until you actually see him do it, you have to at least kind of look at the veteran and say, I need to have this guy ready if the rookie's not ready to go. The hope is obviously that Darren Sproles will be back at some point. And then you have Ryan Matthews, Sproles, and that puts less of a number of touches on the shoulder of Smallwood early, and I think that would be the preferable thing. But if they need Wendell Smallwood to carry the ball 20 times a game, that could be an issue, at least early in the season.
Yeah, interested to see if they look sometime in July when some guys hit the street, or sometime in August when some guys hit the street. If they look to add a running back a little bit later on down the road here. John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Hey, give me your thoughts on Ryan Fitzpatrick. He says he wants to return to the Jets, yet the Jets don't seem to be budging. And, Fitzpatrick's looking around the league at guys like Osweiler and Bradford, and I get his point, but who wins this stare down?
Well, you would have to imagine it's going to be the Jets, because he does not have a fallback position at this point. His fallback position would be to go the Carson Palmer route, and that's sort of retire, but do it with a wink and wait for an injury sort of somewhere else in the league, and then maybe somebody so desperate they work something out as far as a trade goes. But as far as compensation, I understand his frustration. Coming off the year he had, he probably should be paid more than Sam Bradford, than Brock Osweiler. But the NFL is the monetary system is built on a lot of things, not just performance. It's ceiling as a player, it's potential of a young player in the case of Osweiler. And unfortunately, Ryan Fitzpatrick is where he is as a veteran journeyman guy, and there's just nobody willing to give him that kind of money. So the Jets are going to win if he wants to play.
All right, John will be hopefully, if he's feeling better, at OTAs tomorrow. Jim Schwartz expected to talk at 12:45. So I think there should be good questions asked to Schwartz, and we should hear some things about the Eagles' defense. That's something I'm really looking forward to. We haven't heard a lot from Schwartz since he's been hired and since free agency, really. I'm really anticipating and excited to hear what he has to say about his former Bills, guys like Bradham and McKelvin particularly, to see how he plans on using those two guys. I really like the Bradham signing. I think it's underrated. And you really like McKelvin, it sounds like, maybe on this roster, maybe not in general, but that he stands out on this team. Those two guys are two guys that I really want to hear him talk about tomorrow.
Yeah, well, in the case of Bradham, you remember, he's the third linebacker. So as you go to the nickel, it's going to be Jordan Hicks and Michael Kendrick. So to me, he's not going to play enough to be all that impactful, because as we know in today's NFL, your nickelback is going to play more than the third linebacker. So that's why I kind of feel like McKelvin is a bigger deal for the Eagles, because he's certainly going to be on the field for the majority of the time when he's healthy. But you're right about Jim Schwartz and the fact we haven't heard a lot from him except the day that he was hired. So it's going to be interesting to hear what he says. I will certainly be there. I don't know if my voice will be there, but I will certainly be there.
All right, we'll talk to John tomorrow, of course, who will be at the NovaCare Center. And the Eagles just made a minor roster move 5 minutes ago. They signed a defensive tackle, John, as we're sitting here talking, Derek Lott, and they released punter Ryan Quigley. Lott was signed by Tennessee as an undrafted free agent last year. So they recognize, too, that they need a little bit more depth at that position. Not an impactful player, but, hey, you never know with some of these bigger guys if they're just rotational players. Cedric Thornton was a guy that, the Eagles just signed off Washington. No one really thought much of that deal, and he turned out to be a pretty good player for this team.
Yeah, and Bo Allen was a seventh-round pick. He's been at least part of the rotation and be able to help. And you have to find those types of guys.
No doubt.
They did bring in three of the more high-profile undrafted free agents, guys who had potentially draftable grades. So they understand they need help at that particular position. And hopefully one of these guys can prove they can play at the NFL level.
All right, Jim Schwartz tomorrow at 12:45. The players are available between 2 and 3, and John will talk to us at 4:05 like he does every day. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.